Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspirational guest coming right up, and her name is Allegra Houston. Allegra has written screenplays, journalism, and one previous book titled Love Child, a memoir of family lost and found. After an early career in UK publishing, including 4 years as editorial director of Weidenfeld and Nicholson, she joined the film company Pathé as a development consultant. She wrote and produced the award-winning short film Good Luck, Mr. Gortsky, and is the editorial staff of the international art and cultural magazine Garage. So today, Allegra is here to share with us her new novel, Say My Name. So let's welcome to the show, Allegra.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here, and what a phenomenal book. I mean, you must be really happy with the reviews that it's getting.
I am. It's very funny when you write a book because you just don't know how it's going to turn out. And this was my second book, but my first novel, and I really wasn't at all sure I could even write one. So it felt really wonderful to get, I get emails from complete strangers who've somehow happened upon my book and have told me they've, written out sentences of it into their journal, and that it's really, kind of touched them in a very deep way.
Oh, I can understand. I mean, there's so many empowering points to it. And, of course, we're not going to cover the book itself because it is a novel. We want people to pick up their own copy of Say My Name. But why don't you explain to our listeners a little bit about your background and what's inspired you to become a writer?
Well, my background is very complicated, and that's the subject of my first book, which is a memoir called Love Child. Mm-hmm. A memoir of family lost and found is the subtitle. But to make a very, very long story short, one of my families is the movie Houston family, so a family of storytellers. My other family is my English family, and they're a family of writers, although mostly historians and biographers. So I do come about it, fairly honestly. I went to Oxford. I read English. I always loved reading books. And I did always think that I would like to become a writer because it meant that I could live wherever I wanted and I wouldn't have to live in a city. But having said that, I always hated writing. But I loved books and I loved storytelling. And I went to work as a publisher in London. So I've edited, I've been an editor for over 30 years, and I've worked with authors including Jane Goodall, the most wonderful woman I've ever met, most wonderful person I've ever met, 2 Nobel Prize-winning economists, Iris Murdoch, Edna O'Brien. So editing is my comfort zone. And even though I hate writing, I like having written. So my challenge always is to just kind of get enough pages together. Doesn't matter how much of a mess they are. And then I can edit them, quote unquote, and pretend I'm not actually writing, I'm editing.
Well,
so
the book world inside and out there, and with such a creative background with your combined, your families there, my goodness, it seems like you were just predestined to be this phenomenal writer.
Well, it's nice of you to say so. It certainly didn't always feel like that to me when I would be writing things that were just so terrible. They would make me cringe, and I thought, oh, my God, I could never do this. I was walking around, even after I started this novel, I was walking around for a couple of years saying, I really don't think I'm one of nature's novelists. But I just discovered that, my process, and, everyone has a different one, my process is just to try and pretend that I'm not writing, and, so I write longhand and in sort of scrappy bits that aren't even full sentences, anything to pretend that I'm not actually writing the book. I'm just, quote-unquote, generating material. So, that's the way it works for me. I keep generating material and pretending that I'm not writing the book until I have so much material that I can then kind of try and turn the mess into something that I hope by the end is sort of fairly spare. It's not a long book, Say My Name. It's really quite short. So I hope it's, I want to try and say what I want to say or discover what I want to say in as few words as possible.
Well, I'm so glad that you shared your process with us, because you do hear that quite often where, writers don't like the process of writing, or there's maybe they don't like the editing portion or what have you. And so I love how you've reframed that, so you're able to, get these bits and pieces together that creates a beautiful body of work.
Well, making something out of nothing is really scary, because you don't know if you can do it. And I think certainly in my case, I'm working on my second book now, I still don't know if I can do it. And the important thing is, artist friends of mine told me as I was working on this book was just to show up. Just show up every day. And if you don't know what to write about, just write about anything. Write a rant about something that drives you nuts. And eventually, you just build up stuff. And those rants, I have to say, it's one of my favorite kind of techniques for finding something to write about if I don't know what to write about. A couple of them found their way into Say My Name, and it'll be interesting to see what finds its way into the next book. I mean, it's one of, I teach memoir writing workshops occasionally. The main one I do once a year now in Mallorca in Spain, which is just the most beautiful, magical place. And that's one of the exercises that we do in the group in the mornings there.
Yeah, is to get together and do that. My goodness. Well, what a fun adventure that must be in such a beautiful surrounding, and then you're surrounded with other people who are working on their creative process.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're a small group. Last year we had 10 people plus me, and I do the exercises along with everybody else, and we spend the mornings doing these timed writing exercises, which aren't supposed to be good. It only took you 10 minutes to write that thing. But what it is material. And then I spend the afternoons having one-on-one sessions with people talking about the work they're actually working on, because I don't believe that criticism or editing is a spectator sport, and I don't believe in those kind of classes where somebody reads their work aloud and then has to stand there like they're in a struggle session of the Cultural Revolution and hear everybody criticize their work. So that's not the way we go about things.
Well, that's a beautiful way of approaching it, because I know a lot of people cringe or tend not to attend these workshops because of that kind of sometimes that feedback. And I'm sure they want the feedback from you.
The goal is to be supportive, and so one can be far more supportive, one-on-one, where, all I'm trying to do is help the person make their work as good as it can possibly be. But when you have, 8 or 10 other people in a workshop criticizing that work aloud for the group, it's inevitable that some of that is going to be, look how good a critic I am. You can't help but have, mixed motives in that kind of setting. So I just think it's better to have an arrangement that doesn't introduce those kind of mixed motives.
I love that approach. Well, and so for our listeners, that are thinking about purchasing Say My Name, how would you describe your book?
Well, it's very simply a love story between an older woman and a younger man. And it's centered around a musical instrument, an antique, mysterious instrument that's not a violin and not a cello, but something in between, with this very strange carving on it and a mysterious sort of gash in the back where somebody's obviously deliberately damaged it. So this instrument becomes the thing that brings these two people together. And it's a kind of interesting thing, because here I was writing a love story between an older woman and a younger man, and it's based on my own fantasy of, somebody would have written one of the great love songs like, Lay Low or Light My Fire or whatever for me, which is how it turned into being an older woman and a younger man story. I didn't actually set out to write that. But you then come to think, well, what is the happy ending for a story like that? Because, by its nature, it's not a story of, the young girl finds the handsome prince and they get married and live happily ever after. It's not that kind of a relationship. And that's fine, A relationship for a woman in these days isn't necessarily about, finding the right man who's going to make her life so perfect. We're in control of our own lives, and we can be happy without a man as well as with a man. So it was a very interesting challenge to figure out what a happy ending would be of a story of this nature, and it's, I think, not the expected one.
Well, and I love how, it does open up, discussion in regards to these type of connections. And, it makes it okay that it's not this Cinderella story, with the, you marry the prince and you have the white picket fence or whatever the case is.
Yeah, exactly. We all grew up with stories like that. But but we need different kinds of stories now, I think, and the whole, Me Too and, About Time, whatever, all these movements are a very good thing. And the more women can come to a point of not defining their lives by, what the men are doing or what the men want or how men feel about them or how they feel about men, the more we can find, validation in our own selves, the better, I think.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, for sure. And that's without giving anything away here. There were so many points in your book that I felt that were so empowering for women, and that connection is one. Being able to live life as it fits for a woman, as it fits their lifestyle, not necessarily as what the norm is telling us we should be.
Exactly. And the woman in my book is really, kind of a very ordinary woman. She's, lives in the suburbs outside New York in New Jersey. She's coming to the end of a, dead marriage. She hasn't really thought, she doesn't think of herself as adventurous. She doesn't think of herself as glamorous. She doesn't even really, she's never really known herself as self-empowered and self-supporting. So this is something that she discovers through the vehicle of this love affair. And I didn't really know that was the story I was writing until I'd written it, which I think is always a good thing with the book. That the meaning of it kind of happens organically through what the characters end up doing, kind of without the author's conscious direction or preordained direction. So it really did become a story of a woman's self-empowerment and discovery of her own self and her own independence through a love story, rather than just being simply a love story.
Mhm. Yeah, that part is, I think, phenomenal. And I'm sure so many, as you even pointed out, you have people emailing you and writing there. But that's why this would resonate with so many women, just with that storyline.
Indeed. And you'd also be amazed at the number of people who have been in relationships of this kind. I mean, in my book, there's a 20-year age gap. She's 20 years older than the guy. And the number of people who come up to me at readings and say, I'm 15 years older than my husband, or, I'm in a relationship like that, and he's 25 years younger than me, but I don't really tell anyone. Because it's somehow, I always think that something is the last taboo and then another one pops up. But it's certainly still somewhat of a taboo for a woman to be in a relationship with a younger man. And I think the whole, cougar meme doesn't help at all, because it's so disparaging, it's insulting, it's rude, this picture of this predatory older woman with kind of claws and teeth, hunting this poor defenseless young man, when in fact, in virtually every case that I know, it's the younger man who chased the older woman. It's not just these, this kind of cougar picture of, these women using these poor guys. There's a lot that is attractive to a young man about an older woman, and I wanted to portray that too.
Yeah, and have that. How much research did you do when you were writing Say My Name? Or was this
I wish I'd been able to do more, particularly in the young man department. Sadly, that part of it is not based on my life. But, there are certainly many episodes in the book, many emotions and sensations and dilemmas that are taken from my life, just from slightly different circumstances. Really, I didn't have to do much research. I mean, most of my research was confined to things like, what train do you take from New York to New Jersey, and where's the Vaporetto stop in Venice that takes you to the island of Torcello, that the book ends in Venice. So it was, I did have to do some sort of, kind of practical, technical sort of points of research. But really it was written from my own heart and my own life, even though the actual plot line is made up.
Well, and I love how, the characters, you can really see this from your writing too, how the characters kind of took on their own life. And how
I didn't know Eve was, spoiler alert, although actually no, I'll do my best to not spoil it, but the story takes a turn about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through. Eve gets this idea, and I had no idea that was going to happen. I mean, that just came to me one day as I was writing, and I thought, oh my God, I don't know if I'm brave enough to follow this idea. And in the book, Eve doesn't know if she's brave enough to follow it either, but she does. And I'm very glad that she did, because that really became, that was the plot turn that I needed, that, somehow my subconscious or the muse or, the heavens gave me this idea that was able to turn the story from being simply a love story into this story of independence and self-empowerment.
Oh, yes. And in the effort to not give any more away there, why don't we talk a little bit about your first book, your memoir, Love Child? I'd love to hear just, because I know it came from your background, just a little bit about that book.
Okay. Well, basically, it starts when I'm 4 years old, and I'm led into my mother's bedroom and told by my godfather that my mother is dead. She's been killed in a car crash. She had been raising me basically as a single mother, though she was married. But I had never really considered that, I needed a father or there should be a father or anything, because, in the 1960s, fathers were reasonably absent. And I wasn't a questioning type of child anyway. So after she was dead, I was led into a hotel room and introduced to a very impressive man smoking a very impressive cigar, and told, this is your father. And this was the film director, John Huston. And I went to live at his house in Ireland, even though I wouldn't say live with him because he wasn't there much of the time. And then, eventually I ended up in L.A. He remarried my stepmother. And then they got divorced, but I stayed with my stepmother. And one day she sat me down and said, Allegra, I have something to tell you. Always a bad start. When you're 12, somebody who says something like that, it's going to be something, rocking your world to come. John isn't really your father. Your real father is an English lord, and he's coming to visit tomorrow. Great. Anyway, he did come to visit the next day, and, I was not in the market for another father. I had absolutely no desire to not be Dad's daughter. Dad was the center of the universe. Everyone I knew revolved around him, and if I wasn't his daughter, who would I be? But anyway, as things developed, I didn't belong in L.A. I moved to London, where two of my Houston brothers were still in London at that point, and gradually came to know my biological father and my brother and sister on that side, who I'm very, very close to, Jason and Artemis. Close to now, although, I didn't meet them until I was 16, roughly. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to write this book because I'd come to the point where I felt extremely lucky to have these two wonderful fathers. And by that time, I had sort of reconciled these two families into one. And the climax of the book is the christening of my own son in the Rio Grande, when all of my family came together, both sides, the Hustons and the Coopers, and some of them had never actually met each other before. And it was just the most wonderful event. And I thought that I wanted to write a book about making a family out of these, rather unpromising fragments. And kind of hold up a candle for the possibility of rising above, the old resentments and the old jealousies and the chains of DNA, which aren't necessarily in the right place, because my brother Danny actually has a different mother. So he and I don't share any DNA at all. He's Houston. That it doesn't really matter. In the end, you can just simply decide to make your family and love your family for who they are, and not carry on the stories of the past that, only drive you apart.
Well, what a beautiful story. And I'm sure people are going to run out and buy both, not only Say My Name, but also Love Child, because, it's fascinating how you've pieced all this together, and just how the stories come with just such empowerment. It seems to be your overall message that you write
yes,
to.
Yes, it is. Yeah. I realized after having written Love Child that it was actually, yes, it's a story of making a family out of fragments, but it's also a story of becoming the leading character in your own life when you've grown up always feeling like the supporting character in other people's. And I realized this because when I would do readings for it, people would come up to me and say, my dad had the Ford dealership in our small town, or my sister was the head cheerleader, and I always felt so ugly and insignificant next to her. And they'd say, and I know exactly how you felt. So that is really why people connect to Love Child, not because it's a sort of Hollywood memoir, because it really isn't, even though there are Hollywood people in the book, but because it's that kind of, it's a story about how you feel, growing up around these big personalities, and how you feel when when you don't know where you belong, and you're a bit sort of, adrift in your own life and looking for signposts.
Mm-hmm. That's something that everyone can relate to in the family dynamics, because you'll usually have one person that kind of overshadows the rest of the family, and I'm sure a lot of people really related well to Love Child, and that's why it did so well as it did.
Yes, I think they did. I got one letter from a U.S. congressman whose daughter, now aged 20, had found him after he'd never met her before, and he wrote to me asking for advice on how he should, open up a relationship. He wanted to be able to have the kind of relationship with his daughter that I now have with my biological father. And I was just so touched and delighted that, that my book had given him an insight into something good that could happen in his own life.
So beautiful. Well, and to kind of hop back over to Say My Name, what is the hope that what do you hope that readers will take away from your book?
Well, I hope they'll have a really good time reading it, just for starters.
That's without
sexy.
A doubt.
It's pretty sexy. It's pretty explicit. I wanted to see if I could write a book in which the sex wasn't kind of hidden between the paragraphs in the way that it so often sort of is. They take their clothes off, and then the next paragraph begins afterward. And I thought, well, sex is a very important part of life. It's one of the two drives that keeps the species going. And why is it that it's so rarely depicted well, in well-written books? I don't think that there has to be a divide between a well-written book, a book with some literary merit, although I wouldn't say that my book is like, it's not sort of highbrow. But I hope it has literary merit. I don't see why there has to be a divide between, that and quote-unquote romance novels,
Yeah.
So I did sort of set myself the challenge of integrating the sex into the story in a way that I feel that, it usually isn't unless it's bad sex or sort of, morose men in bars wishing they had more sex. That's literary, right? So I think there's been a kind of ghettoization of books in which sex plays a central role, and in this story it does. So that's one thing I want. I hope a kind of lack of embarrassment around sex might be something that people take away from the book. I hope a sense of adventure, a sense of saying yes to to unexpected possibilities that present themselves in life would be something that people would take away from it. And a sense that you don't have to be who the world expects you to be. I realized, again, that wasn't sort of something that I deliberately wanted the book to mean when I sat down to write it. But looking at it now, in retrospect, I see that, most of the characters in it are kind of searching for themselves because they've realized that they aren't who the world has expected them to be and who they've sort of allowed themselves to be in accordance with the world's expectation. And some of the characters are finding that in an empowering way, and some of them are, finding it in a rather sort of desperate way and don't really know how to, like, the husband. He doesn't really know how to deal with this newfound discovery that, this isn't his life, and, his life is passing him by, and he needs to do something drastic to try and find some other way of being. So, I hope that it gives people the question of, is this really the life I want to be leading? And if it isn't, now's the time to figure out what else my life might include.
Yeah, and how to take it from there. Well, my goodness, I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, Say My Name, and it's I hope that our listeners will go out and buy their own copy because I found it to be just a great literary piece of work. And so, Allegra, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
You can go to my website, which is allegrahouston.com, and I will spell it because many people spell it wrong. ALLEGRAHUSTON, not like the city, .com. And you can join my mailing list. I don't send out very many emails, so it's not something that's going to clog up your inbox. But I will let you know where I'm doing events or, what might be kind of going on. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. You can't actually find me on Twitter. I did set up an account, but I don't tweet, so don't worry about Twitter. But you can see a picture of the cat that my son and I just adopted on Instagram. That's the last thing I posted.
Oh, well, that sounds interesting. And, I'm part of your community, so I'm looking forward to getting those emails and learning about where you're going to be at these different events. And I'm sure everyone else is looking forward to doing that as well. Allegra, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on, Marianne. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Allegra. It's been such a joy to spend this time with you and talk about your new book, Say My Name, which is available at your website, allegrahouston.com, at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and all major retailers. If you're interested in her course that's available through Daily Om website titled Forgiveness Through Writing, it's a course in which Allegra will coach you in creative mindset, and she'll give you writing exercises designed to help you drop old resentments and nurture forgiveness and gratitude. Now, can't we all use more of that? My goodness. So you want to go to dailyom.com. That's DAILYOM.com for more information, or at her website, again, allegrahouston.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.